Hello, everybody. Welcome to the EV Advisory Podcast, hosted by JM Toriel, Plug-in BC Lead EV Advisor. So in this episode, JM sits down with Blake Veerman from BC Hydro, who leads the EV charger rebate programs across multi-unit residential buildings and workplaces. We'll dive into why charging where you live or work is a total game changer, and how EV recharging while you recharge is accelerating EV adoption. Plus, we'll also unpack the power of networked chargers, from smarter energy management to potential revenue through the low carbon fuel standard credits. So if you're planning EV charging or just want to stay ahead of the transition, this is the one conversation you don't want to miss. Tune in to the full episode now. See you then.
The EV Advisory is an official podcast of the EV Advisor program with myself as host, JM Toriel, an EV Advisor with Plug-in BC at the Fraser Basin Council, whose location is at the Vancouver offices on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, also known as downtown Vancouver. The EV Advisor program is funded by the Ministry of Energy and Climate Solutions and the Government of British Columbia as part of the Clean BC Go Electric initiative. Our outreach mission through this podcast is to serve you, the listening public, with helpful advice through conversations with leading experts. So Blake, thanks so much for coming today to our offices here in downtown Vancouver. Just to get started, this is a question I ask of all the guests. What got you into the EV ecosystem initially?
Right on. So thanks, JM, and thanks for having me here on the podcast today. So the EV space initially, well, I guess it really goes back to my original kind of maybe first professional goal, which was somewhere around second year university. And it was in a thermodynamics class, and I was like, oh, I want to create the solution that solves the world's energy problems.
Nice.
Which
university was this?
This was UBC Okanagan.
All right.
And that was maybe a little bit ambitious, but over time that refined down to kind of, making sure that people can live a good lifestyle with a lot less impact on the environment. Yeah. And I've basically kind of pursued that throughout my career. Where can I contribute to that? Mm-hmm. And I see EVs, especially here in Canada, where driving is a frequently used option for transportation. Mm-hmm. And the efficiency gain going from a gasoline vehicle to an EV vehicle is just so large, right? It can be, 5 times, right? Yeah. Especially around cities. And it's just hard to have that impact in other areas. So then I started looking to get into the EV space.
Awesome. And we have such a clean grid here in BC as well, thanks to BC Hydro. And I always am mindful of that when I'm charging, my personal vehicle as well. So that's really, inspiring. So you've been leading BC Hydro's EV charger rebate program, I should say maybe managing, for MURBs and workplaces for about a year now. But you have obviously a lot of knowledge in your background through, as you mentioned, the university and as being a professional engineer. So how would you describe the evolution of uptake and adoption in BC from the early adopter phase that we've kind of now come out of through to the present, and how BC Hydro has had a very big role in achieving such high rates of adoption here in BC?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you. I agree. I think BC Hydro has had a huge role in those high adoption. I should say I am a professional engineer, but just for context of anything I say through this interview, it's not meant to be advice. My professional engineering experience is really focused on high voltage equipment, making sure that it's set up correctly. So that is not directly EV related. On the EV side, as you mentioned, I manage the programs. I oversee them. I make sure they're going in the right direction. I think it's kind of incredible, really. The adoption in BC, if I look back, even my own kind of expectations of where this was going 5 years ago. The fact that, in 2024, last year, we were over 20% of new vehicles sold in BC were electric for the second year in a row. That's really kind of beyond an early adopter phase, right? And if I think back to, me car shopping 5 years ago, electric cars still seemed like something for around town or people with quite a lot of money. And, that's no longer the case, right? And that's very much no longer the case. So I think that's a really cool piece of the evolution that's happened. And I think that transition has really been possible through more models available at lower prices, starting to see used EVs available.
That's right.
That really helps kind of widen the adoption, right?
Yeah.
BC in particular, though, I think has really been helped by the availability of public charging. So, as many people probably know, we have an electric highway in BC, right? That's complete now. So as you're going along the highway anywhere in BC within about 150 kilometers, you have access to a charger, both BC Hydro as well as in the southern corner, the Fortis area.
Yeah, and that's multiple highways too.
That's not just one highway. Yeah, that's you can go. I mean, you just went on a road trip, right?
Yes, yeah, northern BC too. So pretty well every single major highway is covered at this point.
Yeah.
I think there's very few gaps in this province, which is really good to see.
And that's huge, right? Because we know people don't choose a vehicle based on what they do every day. They choose a vehicle based on that one thing they do once a year, maybe even less. They go camping, they go on a road trip, and they want a vehicle that's going to be able to handle that. And in BC, an electric vehicle can be that choice already, right? And that's something I find. I do a lot of road trips, and I don't have to think twice about it in BC, right? I can go. A couple of years ago, I was going to a fairly remote place, Wills Ferry Provincial Park, for a kayak trip, and thanks to the electric highway, I could take an EV, right? And that was something where, even then I was, I wonder if this will work, and no problems, right? So I think that's a huge piece. So, you asked about BC Hydro's role. I think the public charging side has been a huge place. But on top of that, of course, there's also the programs that BC Hydro chooses to administer, like the Clean BC Home and Workplace Charger program that you're so familiar with, you're a part of, as well as our programs to support fleets, our programs to help people charge charge smart. So that would be like peak saver connected chargers. We're always kind of on the edge of making those programs to help people with their adoption and to help that adoption fit well with the electric grid.
So getting to the rebate program specifically, so in the context of MURBs, which is multi-residential buildings, and workplaces, we refer to EV chargers. That seems to be the term that's more understandable and a general term that the public understands. Though technically, as we know, EVSE is the appropriate term, which stands for Electric Vehicle Supply Equipment, and that supplies the AC power. So we've been talking about public charging, which is predominantly DC power, right? So that's very fast charging comparatively to AC, and it supplies the EVs with to convert through the vehicle to DC power for the battery. A lot of people don't realize that when it is a level 2 or level 1 charger, that it's running off AC and the vehicle is converting it to DC to charge the battery. So the charging is technically done in the vehicle. But as far as electric vehicle supply equipment is concerned, charging at level 2 is generally regarded as the ample power source for overnight charging predominantly, or in the case of workplace charging. And that's really what the program aims to enhance. The two places where people will be charging the most is obviously at home, number 1, and number 2, kind of workplace. And I guess you could even say third tier would be on the road, going from point A to point B, in DC charging, public charging. So in a nutshell, this is all things that our listeners and viewers can understand if they're kind of entering this world of EV charging. So for this program, I think we understand that the overnight slower charging that would be available through level 2 charging is what the program tries to enhance, and that basically that's what the rebate program is intended for. Right?
Make sure people can charge at home.
Exactly. Yep. So how would you describe the general knowledge amongst BC drivers regarding this and other EV topics? And have you noticed like any big changes recently as far as the general understanding of like how charging works? Right, and I think that's kind of like a mind shift that's taking place. And even if people aren't owning EVs themselves, maybe this is kind of the knowledge that would be useful if the strata members of people in buildings want to put EV charging in, that the people that are wondering why do you need to have EV charging in our building? Why don't you just go to the closest DC charger? Right. So maybe if you can get into that a little bit as to how things have kind of we're kind of going through this mind shift, I think, from an understanding of like how to fuel vehicles.
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack there. Mm-hmm. So I'll start with, I think something about EVs is you have more flexibility, mm-hmm. right? With a gas vehicle, you go to the gas station and you fill up. Maybe, if you're in a really rural place or you have farm equipment or other things, maybe, you have a supplementary tank in the back of your pickup truck that you're going to use. But chances are you go to the gas station and you fill up every time you need gas. And that's the only way. You can't fill up at home. Mm-hmm. With an EV, you have this added layer of flexibility, right? And sometimes it's hard to wrap your head and adjust to having choice, right? So you still can drive an EV and rely on public chargers, which are kind of like your gas station. If they're level 3, they're more like a gas station because they can charge you a lot faster, right? As you mentioned. If they're a public charging level 2, they're still in a public charger, but it's going to be slow, right? That's something that you're doing while you're at a movie or something. So having this new flexibility where if you can put in a charger at home or your office, it's like your car gets to recharge while you recharge, right? While you're sleeping at night, your car is charging. Right. And that way when you leave in the morning, your car's ready to go, right? Like, yeah. And that is maybe like one of the biggest convenience factors of electric vehicles that there is, right? Mm-hmm. It's, you no longer are trying to squeeze in going for gas because like you've had a really busy week and every day, I'll get gas tomorrow, and slowly you're getting more and more into the red because every day when you get home, you get to plug it in if you're lucky enough to have a home charger, and of course that's what our program aims to support. So, and we know once people have chargers at home or work, that's where they charge. It tends to cost less once you have it. Yeah. When it comes to the technology, as more everyday people, not early adopters, are picking EVs, I feel like there's less interest in how does this work. So I feel like there's a bit of a shift, and I'm wanting to kind of change how I communicate that, mm-hmm. where we're just telling people how fast this is, right? Because sometimes you want fast and sometimes you want slow, even if it's public charging. I'll give you an example. There's a certain place I often stop for coffee. If I plug into the fast charger behind it, I have usually just enough time to go in, order a takeout coffee, use the restroom, and get back to my car to continue my road trip. This is a frequent road trip I take. But the last trip, I wanted to sit down inside for coffee. And being on that fast charger meant that I actually, my car's almost full. Mm-hmm. Had to go out and move it kind of in the middle of sitting down and enjoying my coffee. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you actually kind of want a slower charger. So starting to communicate chargers just like, this one's 150 kilowatts, this one's 50 kilowatts, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of one way. And when it comes to level 2 or level 3, I think the easiest way to communicate it is imagining, your phone charger. And that little cube that you plug into the wall, that's the charger, right? That's taking the AC in the wall and it's turning it into DC for your phone that the battery can accept, right? Battery electrons. One, you don't push electrons in and pull them out to charge it, right? You push them in one direction to charge it.
Yep.
So it's kind of like that charger on the wall. There's a little one of them built into your car, into the phone. It's almost like you have a little one of those built into the phone where you can plug the phone directly into the wall without that USB converter, but it's going to charge super slow. Same with the car. And then out in public, you get those those awesome ones that are super fast that you plug in and it says like super fast charging. It's going to be done in 18 minutes on your phone. And it's the same idea. It's just looking for the ones that are labeled. And I think it's pretty exciting, right? We have our 350 kilowatt chargers.
Oh, yeah, those are fast.
I used one of those for the first time in Lake Country about a month ago. And as you drive up to them, you can see it's like, oh, this one must be fast, right? Because it's blue lights and it looks like the future. Pretty exciting stuff, right? And there's 400 kilowatt coming, which also looks pretty futuristic with a big screen on it. And I think just making that visually easy for drivers to pull up and say like, oh, like this time, I want just the fastest one that's here, right?
Yeah.
If you're on a road trip and you don't want to stop for any other reason, but I find on my road trips, I often don't need the fastest one because, I need to stretch, have a little food, these kind of things along the road trip anyways.
Yeah, and you mentioned, I think the key word is convenience, like for everything, right? And we have, for better or worse, gotten used to these screen devices that are in our pockets. Pretty well, everybody has one now. And we charge those every night, right? And that's something that is now become a part of our society, as far as those are actually lithium-ion batteries, same small version of what's in the car. So people, I think, maybe thanks to that as well, have a better knowledge and understanding of how charging actually works. And I always tell people, it is actually much like plugging your phone in overnight.
User-wise.
And that's how you should perceive it, because it is just as your phone is, fully charged in the morning. You can set it. There's so many different ways that you don't actually have to charge it to 100% every night.
Yeah.
You can put it down to 80, and you can. A lot of those things you can do on your apps and your car itself on the display screen. So there's just all these elements of convenience are just getting better, and it is a more convenient way to kind of, as we're kind of talking about fueling the vehicle, it's just a different kind of approach to understanding when it's charged and how and for how long.
Yeah.
The imperative is that if you own an EV, you'll want to have adequate charging levels at level 2 at home. That's I think the main.
It's definitely the most flexible way to do it, right? Because yes, well, a number of drivers can get away with the level 1, so to speak. Maybe that's the wrong way to phrase it, but they can do a lot of their daily driving on the level 1.
Yeah. To
have that flexibility of the level 2 so that you can charge that much faster at home adds a lot of convenience and reassurance for people.
Absolutely.
So it adds flexibility to when they charge, right? So if you're charging on level 1 and you're used to your vehicle charging, all night to make up your daily commute, it's much harder to participate in any utility programs for demand response or different time of day pricing. So,
and that might be adequate for people that say own a plug-in hybrid, for example, where the battery is quite small in most cases, or for older EVs that might have a smaller battery. But we're kind of getting into the next phase of the technology improving to the point where the batteries are quite large, quite powerful, and it wouldn't be sufficiently charged, like say if you're commuting on a level 1 type setup, right? You would definitely want to have level 2 in most cases, I would say.
I would choose level 2 if I had the option for it. Especially if you have a longer commute. I think that's the big one. If you're regularly driving long distances, or if you're doing bigger road trips on the weekend, coming home late on Sunday, and then you have a bit of a commute on Monday morning. Yeah. I mean, if it's a short commute, you're likely still fine. You might be able to recover that big battery piece by piece throughout the week. But there's the difference. I was always somebody, when I drove gas cars, I filled up when I got to half, right? I wanted that reassurance that, pretty much I could get out of the Lower Mainland to the Fraser Valley if I needed to go and see family for any kind of urgent situation, and I wouldn't need to, stop for gas, right? So it's like, for me, that reassurance of, I can get home, I can plug in with level 2, it can charge up and recover much quicker. Definitely.
Yeah. All right, let's switch gears to describe the importance of network charging. We've kind of gone through the kind of level 2 component, especially for this program, that there is the eligibility requirement to have level 2 networked charging installed in order to have access to the rebates.
Yes.
So if you maybe just want to talk about the communications element of network charging and why that has been made an eligibility requirement for the program. And that's also for the standalone as well as the EV Ready. So the 2 streams of rebates that you have available in the program for BC Hydro customers. So yeah, if you could maybe just talk about the importance of network charging and why this is a feature that if a building is looking at the types of charging they're wanting to install, that should be a pretty important focal point.
For sure. So in terms of eligibility for the program, we're talking about multi-unit residential buildings and workplaces where the network requirement is there. And that's important for a number of reasons. There's a lot of kind of optional features that a strata or a rental building management company or a workplace might want to take advantage of. Those kind of optional nice to haves could be seeing the status of the chargers, doing remote resets on the chargers, so they can track the uptime, see reliability issues. They might also, manage their payments through those network services. There's a lot of features that are nice to haves. There's also some features that may be required in some cases when it comes to kind of energy management, where you're trying to make sure that the chargers aren't overloading their circuits, but you might also be picking a network system that allows you to manage the overall demand from all the chargers, because if you're a commercial customer, you pay for the demand. So that means that if you use more energy at once, it costs you more. That's a very simplified version of putting it. But
well said.
So you might want to intentionally limit the speed of those level 2 chargers within a reasonable extent, so that if there's a lot of them plugged in at once, they slow down a little bit until some of the chargers have finished, and then the rest can speed up and catch up. Yeah. And that's a way to manage your electricity bills. But maybe most importantly, for the province of British Columbia, we have the low carbon fuel standard. Right. And the low carbon fuel standard means that you can what it means for you as a building operator who's providing plug-in services in your building is that you can collect credits and you can sell those credits. And those credits, they vary in value. It's an open market, but it can be quite a significant revenue source. Yeah. So if you're charging vehicles, at least 15,000 kilowatt hours per year or more, which I want to give you how many EVs that is, but of course it varies so much by usage. Let's call it about 5.
Yeah, that's what I usually tell people as well, like around 5, because obviously it's a market value that changes. Yeah. So any given year, any given month, potentially it could vary. It could vary. Yeah.
So in order to sell those credits, that building management company, that strata, that workplace needs to be able to account for the refueling, the charging that has happened with this low carbon fuel. And that needs to have recorded charge session data, which is a relatively new requirement within the LCFS, but need to be able to produce a log of all of the different charging sessions from all of the different EVSEs, from all the different chargers, as you were describing earlier. I'll just refer to them as charger for the sake of all the listeners, but
please do.
You need to be able to account for each of those charging sessions and how much energy was delivered in each of them. So that is a key reason and really a multi-unit residential building is causing themselves future problems to not be able to participate in that, because that's a revenue stream that you want to have hitting your books.
That's right.
So that's a big one. And then there's also the kind of, what does the future look like, right? What demand response programs could there be in the future? Could adjusting, like controlling the chargers from a simple portal, allow you to participate in some future programs or rates? You know, those aren't determined at this state.
Right.
But as you know, somebody who is responsible for thinking about assets for numbers of years, that's something that I consider is, where do we expect the future to be going?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to point out that kind of like in the early adopter phase, when network charging wasn't really as relevant as it is now, I would say. Yeah.
And you mentioned there, installations where they're taking out kind of older equipment, and that's really something we want to avoid, right? When we're looking at projects that come through the incentive program, really the goal is to make sure that the best practices are being applied, right? The goal is to use the incentive program to guide people into doing the best practice, guide the industry into operating under best practices, right?
Yep.
And that's kind of often the way that things move over time, right? Is like incentive program to do something the best way, and then the codes and standards can catch up, and then it can go from there.
Yeah. And that actually brings us to the next question I wanted to ask, which is, I always advise those reaching out to the EV Advisor program and service that mostly, condo stratas in the Lower Mainland, but it does go out into different jurisdictions and municipalities and whatnot. But when beginning the project of installing EV charging, they should first conduct an EV ready plan, or what we call an EPR, or the electrical planning report. And that's needed by most stratas to conduct for compliance with the Ministry of Housing at this point. I think that was introduced just in 2024. So would you agree that this process really helps residents living in MURBs to have a better understanding of their future electrical needs, and also provides better basis for contractors retrofitting for EV charging in shared parkades? And are there some good examples of things you look for in EV ready plans? Because you would receive the EV ready plans through the process that's on your website. So when an application starts for a building, they would send technically an EV ready plan right to your team, and you would be looking through the different aspects of how this building plans to accommodate each resident in the building. So maybe you can just talk about that a bit.
Yeah, so that's actually a really important point, and I think that's excellent advice to recommend, any building before they really go too far down or go down at all the path of putting in chargers one at a time, to have somebody look at what capacity they have. And as you mentioned, the electrical planning reports, those are being phased in BC in different regions at different deadlines. The EV Ready plan is something that right now we provide incentive for through the program. So that's a great way to have that planning done in a subsidized way to make sure that everybody in the building can have access to EV charging. And the reason that's so important is without that pre-planning, you might go to an electrician and say, can we put in a charger here? And he looks at your service and he looks at your panel and he says, sure, no problem. And you do that 3 or 4 or 5 times, maybe more. And then you one day go there and he says, oh, you're out of capacity, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So that EV Ready plan, that electrical planning report, lets you look at the overall, what we call, like on the design side and engineering, the ultimate plan. What is this going to be in the future? And then kind of, smartly work towards that, whether you're going to do all the infrastructure at work once, or you kind of decide there's enough space you can do some of the standalones first and then do all the infrastructure.
Yeah.
But at least you're making that as an informed decision. The second part of your question, or maybe this was the entire of your question, I just, was, impressed and reaffirming that is good advice.
That was good. That was a good rundown. Very good rundown.
Is what do I look for? and at first I should say you're right, it does go to the team. But the things that I'm really looking for, and I'm making sure that the rest of the team is checking for, and more frequently, right? We have a team of engineers. They are reviewing the EV ready plans, but they are not providing a sealed, engineering record.
Seal of approval.
Seal of approval, right? So they're checking for conformance to the program. The aspects of that are most important to me that are being checked are to make sure that plan is clearly communicating what it will or won't do. Because there are a lot of different ways to meet the charging needs in a building. There are a lot of different results that you can want out of that. One building might want a charging system that gives dedicated level 2 charging to every single resident. And it's going to be much more expensive, but if that's what they want, then they might be willing to pay for that. Another building might be willing to pay less in order to have the circuits shared between multiple vehicles. So you have one circuit going out, it's shared between the 4 neighboring stalls, somebody plugs in, they're getting full level 2 speed. If somebody else plugs in beside them before they're done, that power is being shared between the 2, so they're charging slower. And then when one finishes, the other one's going full speed again. If all 4 are plugged in together, it's slower. And that's going to, of course, at times deliver slower charging, but at a much lower initial cost of putting in the charging system than dedicated. And you can kind of go further with that. You might go to 6-to-1, or you might look at an energy management system that's looking at your overall building, and it's like, it's not the 4 neighboring stalls that are, maybe they share power with each other, but overall all 400 parking spots might also share a certain amount of power, so charging starts slowing down if there's more than 100 vehicles charging in the building all at once.
And that's important for like demand charge, like you mentioned before.
That's right.
The cost associated with, the electricity, as far as BC Hydro goes.
Yes.
You don't want people to be in that predicament where they're spending an excessive amount because so many people are, charging at the same time. We want this to be, a good process that's ultimately going to save them money. By choosing to drive electric vehicles versus internal combustion engines in the first place. So like keeping those demand charges down is part of the energy management component.
Exactly. So that's 100% true. So not only is this saving on the capital costs, putting this in at the beginning, but then your operating cost, your electrical bill, is benefiting from doing that sharing. And often the impact on performance can be less than you expect, because the reality is it's very rare that everybody gets home and plugs in at the same time. And with level 2 charging, most people's commute charging is done quite quickly compared to how much time they're home for overnight. What I'm looking for with these is to make sure that it's not being over advertised. So that's something that I really ask the team to be looking for, is if the plan says that the average resident in the building drives 50 kilometers a day, right? Commute 25 kilometers one way, 25 kilometers the other way, maybe that's including a detour to pick their kids up from school. I want to make sure that they're not splitting the available capacity. That available power isn't being split so far that by the time there are all 400 cars in the parkade being electric vehicles, that the charging becomes unreasonably slow, right? I want to make sure that at that point, when every resident, this is talking about that, making sure that they're not having to change something later, right? The incentive program is available now. We want to make sure that when they do the work under the incentive program, they're getting a product that's going to last the distance, which means it's going to supply for when everybody is driving an EV. But it also means making sure that if that plan says 50 kilometers a day, that when all 400 vehicles are EVs, that 50 kilometers a day is reliably met.
And it goes back to the convenience piece that you mentioned earlier as well. So, we don't want to inconvenience people to the point where whatever design they have was really just focused on a few chargers. And that's one of the benefits, I think, of going the EV ready route over the standalone, where you basically can get up to $14,000 for the chargers themselves. So it's basically up to 10 or so chargers at $2,000 a piece with the standalone rebate, versus going the whole EV ready process, which would include the plan as kind of the core design. And how it's really meant to be forecasting into the future, and being future proofed as a result of designing for each resident in the building to meet that EV ready standard.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's giving them that option, that future forecast, or I would say future design, to meet that standard.
Yeah.
Other things I look for is I like to see. These are things I like to see is some kind of showcase that the designer, the contractor preparing the EV ready plan, has had discussions and educated the strata or the rental management company about some of the other pieces about EV charging, right? I really like when I see a section about demand charges that explains how, if everybody gets home at 4 p.m. and plugs in at 4 p.m. and you have this huge spike in demand, that's going to cost a bunch of extra money. Yeah. So instead, if you spread that spike out, to become a little flatter, you can actually do the same charging over a bit longer of time for less money, right? I really like to see that. I really like to see explanations about the low carbon fuel standard and about how that's a potential revenue source. I really like to see kind of details about is there any kind of maintenance that you'll need to do associated with this system, right? Are there any electrical operating permits you're going to need? Is there anything else? Something that's showing that the contractor is going kind of beyond the very bare bones of providing just one solution to discussing options with the building, because as I mentioned, there's many ways that you can design EV ready for building, and it's that building management that needs to be educated to understand, how fast do I want to be able to charge compared to how much do I want to pay compared to how many conduits do I want running around my parkade, right? That's actually big advantage of going the EV ready route is, often buildings do choose circuit sharing, and now you have a lot less conduits running around your parkade because you're doing kind of one run to a junction box near a number of spaces, and then drops to the parking spots from there, as opposed to each time somebody wants an EV charger running a set of conduit along the parkade, which by the time, if you're in a big parkade with 400 parking spots, it can become pretty messy.
It could be more expensive in the end too, right?
Significantly.
Yeah. So I think we should point out the distinction between the EV Ready plan, which is part of this program, and the EPR that I mentioned as well, the electrical planning report that's needed for the Ministry of Housing for compliance for all stratas, at least stratas and condos, and that is you'd get up to $3,000 for the plan per building. One time only, so if people want to do multiple plans, it would only be the one that was covered.
Yeah, and it can be, I would say, it can be wise to do both at once, right?
Yeah.
If you think the electrical planning report is almost like a higher level, more zoomed out of how are you electrifying everything in the building, and then the EV ready plan is more detailed about how are you electrifying the vehicles in the building, right?
Yeah.
Could be a way to put it.
Given that the OEMs are making this switch to this system, and most EV chargers that are being installed in parkades have just the J1772 plug at this point, how do you think things are going to transpire as far as replacing eventually the J1772 plugs with this new NAC system? And do you foresee this happening, in the next little while, or, is it something that the EV charging industry is also changing as to what chargers they have available to the public at this point as well? Are you seeing that, in some of the plans that you receive? Are you seeing the equipment itself being modified?
This is a good question. And to start with, technology changes the standards.
Yeah.
In the charging market, on the home chargers, the program has NACS chargers as eligible starting this year, recognizing that change.
That's good.
So customers can choose, right?
Yeah.
And it's really up to the customers choosing. On the public charging side, recognizing this, BC Hydro has started to include NACS ports at some of our charging hubs, so we're starting to have a mixture of both at some of the key hubs, and we're monitoring the demand for that. Basically, we're We can see how much certain ports are used. We understand what nearby charging stations there are to make sure, again, our goal is to make sure that people can have an EV and drive anywhere they want in the province, right? So, we may not add that at one station if there's another station just down the road that already has that. But we're constantly monitoring the need for it and demand in different regions and adapting to that. And it's not a difficult retrofit. So we can build a charger that's CCS now because most vehicles still are. And we can change that to be NICS in the future.
In more simple and general terms, an EV-ready building is defined as a building which is ready to have charging stations available for each unit in the building, so each resident would have access. How has EV readiness by numerous municipalities through bylaws helped provide a more holistic approach in establishing a future-proof solution for buildings? And would you consider EV readiness as the new baseline standard for MURBs now that so many new buildings are built EV ready?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of existing buildings as well. But when it comes to new buildings, municipalities, 70% of BC's population lives in a municipality where the bylaws are in place around electric vehicle parking and some sort of EV readiness. Those vary by municipality, but it's certainly kind of setting the stage and the expectation so that new buildings at least are some level of EV ready. For our program, so there's maybe just to talk definitions and we can geek out a little bit here, but there's a building and then there's an EV capable building where you've put in kind of the core, like you have electrical panels to support EV charging, you have the service to support EV charging, but maybe that's all buried in one corner of the building. And then there's EV ready, which is you have everything that you had for EV capable, but now you've put conduits and wires and junction boxes, whatever else you need to get that to every parking spot.
Got it.
And for the sake of our program, what we've done is to balance the costs a little bit between upfront and individual charger installations. We said as long as you've put a termination point within 5 meters of a parking spot, that's EV ready. Because now we know that each owner has quite equal access to add an EV charger once they're ready to do so, once they buy an EV. So that's kind of like helping people balance out that day one cost of putting in the infrastructure with that final cost of charging station install.
So, we're in a good place in British Columbia where so many municipalities have taken that into their bylaws and ensured that at least for the new buildings, that they should be EV ready. And it's kind of a really good term to ensure that it's future-proofed and that major retrofits won't have to be done to accommodate the growing public that owns electric vehicles.
It's true. I mean, the term says it, right? It's EV ready. That doesn't mean it has the charger. It just means that it's ready for you to move in and add a charger easily, being the idea. Yeah, and I think a key point that came up partway through there was, once you own an EV, once you've experienced charging at home and realized how convenient it is, it's something you're going to look for in your next property decision, right? And there's going to be a value associated with that convenience, right? It may not be an infinite price difference. For some people, it might be make or break if they have really long commutes. They really want to, be able to charge at home every day. For other people, it's a nice to have, but it's definitely like that level of convenience has a value to you. And then also there's the price difference, right? I mean, one thing that's hard to say is exactly, right, what does each strata charge for EVs? How do they charge that, right? It can be good thinking about like buying property advice as an EV owner to look at those strata bylaws to see what is their pricing structure and does that work for me?
And basically, the whole principle of what is deemed EV ready is I think, becoming a more hopefully recognizable term that, as it's defined. You don't have to get into all the words, but the main thing is that when people are looking for a place to live, that they want to know that their stall or garage has, if not a charger already installed, which is the best case scenario, but at least the ability to put one in. which is what EV Ready really is.
Yeah.
So, based on that kind of value, new buildings, obviously, because most of them are built EV Ready, the rebate program does not accommodate those, so we should point that out. But the retrofit, which is the majority still of the existing buildings out there, given that it's a much more complex process to, conduct that retrofit and basically put all the infrastructure in, that's the most expensive piece. And so that's what the rebate is really geared towards, accommodating those stratas, those buildings, those co-ops that want to put charging in and make their parkades EV ready, that they would have up to $120,000 to do the infrastructure piece of the EV ready process.
That's right.
There's this kind of running joke where it's like, well, how long does it take for you to charge? I say, well, basically 5 seconds. It's the time it takes to go take the plug off the wall and plug it into your vehicle.
Yeah.
That's the time.
Yeah.
It's going to be, fully charged potentially by the morning when you need it to commute or whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
But that, again, is, I think, that the piece that maybe a lot of people aren't thinking of.
Yeah.
On the convenience side, is just how convenient that is.
Yeah.
Once it's a pretty short learning curve.
Yeah.
As an EV driver myself, to kind of get into that new way of thinking that we talked about earlier of, how are things charged? Well, it's basically like your phone. Like you charge it in overnight, and it's fully charged in the morning. That's the same principle.
Yeah, and I think that's actually, you'd asked me earlier about kind of changes in people's knowledge and changes in the the early adoption kind of piece, and that would maybe be something I'd add to that is the reasons people choose EV. Well, at the very beginning, it might have been more on the environmental kind of status, something cool. It's transitioning, and that's where we're seeing big increases in like medium duty electric vehicles around the province. I don't know if you've noticed in your neighborhood, but in mine,
definitely delivery trucks.
Delivery trucks,
Yeah.
right? Electrician vans.
Yep.
It's just exploded recently,
Yep.
and those aren't as likely to be driven by a status or environmental. Some of them might have environmental corporate objectives, but generally companies are looking at the balance sheet, right?
Yeah.
And it's starting to be driven by financial, convenience, practicality.
Yeah.
Is a read I take from the shift in who's adopting EVs.
Yeah. One question I want to ask is how do you and your team at BC Hydro approach a MER building at the end of the project? We tend to see, mostly residents that want to put in charging at the very beginning of the process. They're kind of like asking, how do we do this? Those are, I would say, the bulk of our questions at the beginning.
Yeah.
What actually happens at the end? So once the installation has been completed, what comes next?
Yeah, that's right. So once the installation is completed, generally, the customer is going to send us their required documents. They're going to send us the pictures, the proof of networking, kind of baseline, so that we can look through that and have a reasonable assurance that this project is completed. At that point, we dispatch it to a third-party independent company who goes and performs a site inspection. They're looking at program requirements. They're not there to replace an electrical inspector, right? All your permits, they have their own requirements for that.
Yep.
They're there to make sure that the program requirements are met, that if your plan said that you were going to build 4 EV chargers per circuit, and then you changed it to 8, then that's something that we want to know about to make sure that, was this an intentional thing? Does the building management understand what that means, right? Because that's going to deliver lower performance than they were expecting. Does that meet their requirements? And we're basically looking at that is, did this project complete and meet the requirements?
Right.
Ultimately, making sure that they got what they paid for is still the responsibility of the customer, right? The customer has signed a contract with a contractor to perform work, and they have some role in that project management and making sure that they've gotten what they've paid for.
Right.
Our third-party contractor, can be some added assurance, but shouldn't be their only assurance of that. Their role is to make sure that as a program, we're delivering what we say, right? We have the responsibility and the privilege of administering this program on behalf of the province, right? And we need to, be accountable to say, we spent this money on the program, on this project, and it delivered something in conformance with what this program is meant to do.
Yeah. So there's much discussion about how the next technological advances in EV chargers is to incorporate bi-directional energy, or vehicle to grid, V2G, or vehicle to building, vehicle to load. This would potentially allow electric vehicles to be a net supplier of stored energy that would go back to the grid, enhancing stability and supporting renewable energy integration. Do you think we'll reach a time when EVs could be net suppliers of energy to the grid and for utilities during peak demand periods, and potential earnings for EV owners and strata buildings and the like? And how close are we to reaching that?
Yes, this is a pretty exciting topic.
Yeah.
So I think first, just like base place to start. On the electrical grid, power is produced and consumed at the same moment. That energy going through your light bulb is being produced at the same instant it's going through your light bulb.
Right.
And that means that constantly the amount of power is going up and down, and there's certain cycles that it follows fairly routinely. So you can see most days around 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock, you start to see the amount of power being used and produced increasing, sometimes fairly rapidly, and then it goes up and it sustains high through an evening peak, and then it goes down again.
Right.
And the whole grid has to be built in order to meet that. So under the classic grid, we have, more generators than we need, right? Whether those are hydroelectric, whether those are gas turbines, not in BC. No matter where you are, that's the way the grid works, right? Is you have to build it for that peak, and not just that peak that day. You have to build the whole system for that worst peak of the year,
Right.
and that's really expensive. So this is why I say vehicle to grid is very exciting, because it's this. Electric vehicles are already an incredibly flexible load, especially with the level 2 charger, like we've been talking about. Charging an EV for most people's daily driving doesn't take all night. So that's a flexible load that people can be participating already in a time of day rate, so that they're charging it at the night when electricity is cheaper, right? If they're signing up for an optional rate like that. It's not a requirement in the province, that's an optional rate. They could also be participating in demand response programs. So in British Columbia right now, in BC Hydro Territory, we call that the Peak Saver program, and customers might be getting an email to, tomorrow between these hours, please reduce your load and we'll give you a certain amount of money. Right now it's $3.
Yeah, I'm on that.
Awesome.
And
Yeah.
we should let the listeners know as well that would only be for single family home, and not MURBs or workplaces.
Yes, with EVs it becomes difficult. So I'm on that too. I'm in a MURB, but I can't use an EV for that because it's not on my unit's bill, it's on a common bill. So that's right, that is an important distinction. And then, same with also for detached homes, EV chargers can be connected into Peak Saver, same with thermostats, and then you're getting a seasonal reward and you don't have to think about it. You don't have to manually do something, you sign up for it once and then we do it and we pay you at the end of the season, right? So that is already there, and that's already helping with those peaks, right? That's a way that it benefits everybody in the rate base, right? Because paying somebody to do that is cheaper than building the system to meet an even higher peak. Vehicle to grid is, of course, the next step. And it's more technically difficult because now you're injecting power back into a system that was originally built, right? For 100 plus years, the grid has been built for power to flow one way, right? You have a generator somewhere, it goes through transmission lines, it goes through substations, it goes through distribution lines, into your neighborhood, into your house, and it's all one way. So vehicle to grid has this added complication that whole system, now it has to accept the other way, which impacts some of the protection, some of the settings. We don't need to get into that. But it's pretty exciting. In 2023, we did the first lab test for us. That was out at PowerTech Labs. We had a school bus feed into the grid for the first time. And now, just last week, we did the announcement that we had, an actual demonstration project.
Amazing.
And then we'll go from there, right? We'll take lessons from there, and the next step would be looking at kind of locating community hubs.
Yeah.
So we'll see what that looks like exactly as we learn from each stage.
Amazing. So yeah, as an EV enthusiast, one of the things that, especially in the last 10 years, people would always bring up is, EVs are going to drain our grid and take up so much energy, and it's going to be like, a net liability to the grid. That like, how are we going to be able to supply all that energy to all those vehicles if everybody switched tomorrow? That type of scenario. And what is so exciting here is that, instead of having kind of that rationale, it kind of puts it on its head by saying, no, actually, EVs will be net suppliers to the grid. So the stored energy that's unused when it's parked is going to eventually, and pretty well now already, be brought to the grid when it's needed most, which would be during peak hours, right?
Yeah, so that's the general idea.
Right.
And there's a few pieces I want to unpack there. So I don't have numbers in front of me here. I can't say whether that will be a net supplier during peak. I think, we need to get into our integrated resource planning teams, probably the right team to ask about that, to look in detail at the forecast and what are the plug-in rates, everything else.
Right.
There's certainly some more challenges on the individual user when it comes to vehicle to grid. Not very many vehicles at this stage are set up for it.
That's right.
And there are implications. So like on the school buses, that's a really easy market to target because they typically have much more range than they're using every day, and they get back to plug in at their depot early enough that they're available to support the peak, right? And then it's one company has a lot of school buses, and they can come up with a commercial agreement with the school bus supplier as to what range of battery they can use as part of that vehicle to grid without impacting their bus warranty, right? Without impacting their battery warranty. So there's a lot of kind of steps kind of left to get there, but right now at 100%, actually, I wish I'd started on this side of it, is, EVs are absolutely often made out to be a bigger challenge.
And more of a drain.
More of a drain.
Right, yeah.
And the reality is they're a very flexible load.
Yeah.
So, as I guess one thing I'd say is BC Hydro has been running demand side management programs for more than 20 years. Thinking if it's now maybe more than 30 years, where we've become very good at looking at what are the costs of supplying energy, and if we can help customers save energy and pay them for that instead of supplying new energy, is that better for everybody? Does that keep all of our rates lower? And if so, then we will do that, right?
Yeah.
That's a very simplified version of it. And now we're doing that for capacity as well.
Yeah.
And with that, it does open a lot of opportunities with a load as flexible as an EV, where you're right, people often will leave it plugged in all night. All they care about is at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning when I leave for work. I have a full enough battery to go to work, or whatever battery state I said, maybe I said 80%. I just want it charged up to that level that I want it charged to tomorrow morning. And what happens in the time it's plugged in, can at the very least already be a source of reducing their bill through participating in time of day, by participating in peak saver, and in the future, a vehicle to grid model. Once we get there.
Yeah. So here's a fun question for you. What are your 3 top EV models? And you can use any reason to back this up. It doesn't have to be from personal experience necessarily.
Yeah. It's funny you ask that, because first of all, something to know about my past is I was really into cars. So I was trying to count and realizing I've had 7 cars and 2 motorbikes. And that was all before I was 30. Because when I was 30, I sold my last car. And I haven't owned one since. But that's been intentional because I realized I really like electric vehicles. And I don't really drive enough to justify it, but also I like trying them all. So I do a lot of road trips. I almost exclusively use vehicles for road trips, and occasionally, if I should carry something really big around town. And I was going to say I always rent an EV when I can, but I can't think of the last time that I took anything but an EV. There's a few things, though, that I think people should consider. Because cars are an individual decision.
Absolutely.
Kind of one thing is just to keep that in mind during a purchase decision that, yes, going to that occasional use vehicle, it's going to hurt more with an electric vehicle. That said, it's still worthwhile because now you're actually having a bigger fuel bill savings.
That's right.
But maybe use that as an opportunity to consider what you really need in your daily driving. Just my thought. The next thing is, what do you use it for? For me, I've taken EVs on, the biggest road trip I did in an EV was 14 days, 7,000 kilometers, a whole bunch of national parks through, I went through part of BC, I did a big circle through the western United States. This was a couple of years ago. And, that's kind of different set of priorities than often I do road trips to the Okanagan. Occasionally I do a road trip to the Kootenays or to the Rockies. And depending on what I'm doing, the needs can be a little bit different. And I think the same is true for anybody. So the things I consider are more so than range. How fast does this charge?
The charging curve.
The charging curve. And that is probably my number one consideration, because that both what is the advertised, how fast can it charge, but then also doing a little bit of research and review and seeing what people are actually saying about it, because different manufacturers, they do have different curves. Some of them charge really fast during a very narrow window of the battery, and then the rest of your charging time you're at a big reduced speed. And some of them will keep that charging speed up right up to 80% before they taper off.
That's right.
And that makes a big difference in your flexibility with your stops. How fast does it charge? And what does that charging curve look like? That said, cars now, I was surprised actually. I took a car that had about 90 kilowatt top charging speed all the way to the Kootenays from the Lower Mainland this summer. And I expected, being kind of a more budget friendly EV with a lower charging speed, I thought I would feel like I was really waiting around for the charging. But it turned out, because it had a fairly long range, like a 400 kilometer plus range, by the time it was needing the charging, I was needing a break. So there were some times where I was, stopping for a break because I wanted to take a walk around downtown and get ice cream, and I picked the spot to park as the spot with the charger, and I'd walk around and get my ice cream. And it turned out to actually be enough, even on a longer road trip like that. I don't think it would be enough for my 7,000 kilometer trip. Right? If you're regularly doing a 7,000 kilometer trip in a couple of weeks, you're going to really prioritize both charging speed and range. And then the next is just the physical, just like any other car decision, right? Do you need a hatchback? Do you need an SUV? Do you need a sedan, right? It's a lot of personal choice. But the electric specific things that I'd look for practicality every day is how fast does that charge? Will that charging speed be maintained throughout the charging curve? Does the range need? And the way I test that is I'll go into a route planning app and I'll pick the vehicle and I'll plan out a long road trip. And it'll tell me, you're going to stop to charge, 3 times totaling 25 minutes in one vehicle, or 4 times totaling an hour in another vehicle, or 2 times totaling an hour and a half in another vehicle, right? So I try it out in a route planning app that accounts for those charge curves so that I can kind of see the difference, right?
A better route planner?
I do generally use that. Yeah. And the other piece I'd add, though, thinking about used is, we know EV batteries are lasting really
longer.
Way longer, right? Yeah. There was the article in Nature Energy, right? Really top level scientific research, 300 million data points on vehicles, and they're kind of saying it looks like modern EVs, not the early ones before they had good temperature control on the batteries, and the battery, were a bit different than they are now, right? Things have improved, are outlasting their petrol. British study, so petrol, gas equivalent.
And the 1,000+ parts that go along with an internal combustion engine versus a few moving parts in an electric vehicle, that's always something to consider.
Yeah.
I always tell people as well, like the maintenance savings, not just the fuel savings, like for going electric and sort of doing the math as far as that's concerned on how much you'd save over, say, a 5 to 10, but certainly, yeah, like 150,000 kilometers in one vehicle. I think you won't have to replace your batteries. This was like a big concern for a lot of people when EVs first came out. It's like, well, what happens when we need to replace the battery? It's like, well, first of all, it's under warranty for like 8 years, like I think is on average with the OEM. And then secondly, you save so much on maintenance. Like, change the windshield wipers. Like I actually did this recently with my vehicle, and windshield wiper fluid. That's about it.
Yeah, I think there's some general knowledge that's still building there, and a great source of knowledge is somebody who already owns it.
That's right.
Right.
Yep.
Thinking about buying it, see somebody stopped and starting to charge. If you feel comfortable going up to that person and asking, like, it can be great to hear from them. Like, hey, like, how do you feel about this? Right.
Especially what's going on in China right now, where, as far as the price of the vehicles and the price of the batteries, which has always been the most expensive component of an electric vehicle, is just exponentially lower than 10 years ago. And I think that the value of like the metals in the battery, like the lithium, the nickel, and all those other parts of the battery make it like valuable, but it's kind of like the first iPhone you purchased versus the one you have now. That's the same kind of chemistry, but it's improved. And obviously the batteries themselves, whatever size, have reduced tremendously. So, last question. If you had a wish or a magic wand to change one thing, what would it be?
About EVs.
It doesn't have to be, but that's up to you. That's up to you.
I really want to see kind of us progress to a point where people have a lot of choices in their transportation. So, I'm really big on efficiency, right? How are we using energy efficiently? Mm-hmm. And EVs are hugely more efficient than a gasoline-powered vehicle, as we talked about. The input energy is just so much lower. Yeah. So I would want to see that being an option for people. Just like, I also want to see people having the option to bike or bus or walk places, and I think like it should be individuals should be able to choose how they're getting around. One of the big barriers when it comes to vehicles is like having access to charging. So I think seeing some like really good progress on making charging accessible. I think like in MURBs, that's one of the hardest kind of sectors to add charging at home. So continued emphasis on adding EV charging in MURBs so that people have that option to pick EVs in the best scenario possible, right? There's lots of people who have been choosing to switch to EVs and rely on public charging, and that seems to work. But we know it's that much easier and people are that much more satisfied once they can charge at home. So I'd like to see that continue.
So everyone having the ability to charge at home in BC, there. Sounds very, that's great. Thanks so much. Really appreciate your time today. And those are all the questions that we had. I think we covered a lot of ground, and really glad that you're part of our working group, that we have meetings on a continuous basis talking about these things and trying to always improve the programs that we're working on. It's inspiring, and glad to be a part of it, and thanks very much for being here today as well.
Awesome. Thank you, JM.
Plug-in BC strives to inform you with expert advice to assist you with your EV charging needs. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and review us wherever you get your podcasts or on this YouTube channel. Plug-in BC on our socials, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. You can also check us out on our informative website at pluginbc.ca, where you can also sign up for our newsletter. I'm J.M. Toriel, advising you to plug in BC.